Chapter 20, the Principal-Broker Relationship, Employment. This chapter is all about agency. Agency is the relationship created when one person is given the right to act on behalf of another. The principal is for whom the agent acts, and the agent is the party acting on behalf of another. In a typical real estate transaction, the principal is the seller of the property. The agent is the broker, and there's also a third party. The third party is the potential buyer. In the principal-broker relationship, the broker is the negotiator. The broker does not take title or possession. And the broker is acting on behalf of the seller. They engage in a contract called a listing agreement. So the real estate listing agreement is an employment contract between the property owner and a real estate broker, the purpose of which is to find a ready, willing, and able buyer for the seller's property. The commission to be paid to the broker must be stated in the contract. The contract must be in place for the broker to recover his commission. Therefore, the brokerage commission is an agreed amount of compensation the owner agrees to pay the broker. It is not set by law. Actually, the amount of this commission is negotiable between the owner of the property and the broker. There are different ways to calculate the commission. However, the percentage of the selling price is the most common way to calculate a broker's commission. The typical commission fee in the United States is somewhere between 5 to 7% of the property selling price. However, the commission does not have to be in dollars. It could be something else of value. There are various types of listing contracts: the exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, open listing, net listing, advanced fee listing, and advanced cost listing. Let's look at each one individually. With the exclusive right to sell, the listing broker is entitled to a commission no matter who sells the property during the listing period. This is the most common type of listing. Hence, the seller engages only one broker and earns a commission no matter who finds the ready, willing, and able buyer. This listing agreement is the most common because it generates the most effort exerted by the broker. Now, what happens if the seller gets cold feet and changes his or her mind? In that case, if the broker has found a ready, willing, and able buyer, the commission is still owed. The broker might be a little less enthusiastic under this form of listing, but it does still involve only engaging one broker. But again, the owner reserves the right to sell the property himself without owing a commission to the broker. The open listing carries no exclusive rights. Whoever sells the property will earn the commission. So in this case, the owner also retains the right to sell the property himself without owing a commission. The owner is offering several brokers the equal chance to sell the property. But since there are so many brokers with this chance to earn the commission, brokers are reluctant to develop a sales effort because this listing offers the least protection. The net listing is created when an owner states the price he or she wants for the property and agrees to pay the broker anything above this amount as commission. So the owner states how much he or she wants to net from the transaction. In terms of selling price, anything over and above that net amount is the commission to the broker. Net listings are prohibited in most states in that it just has too much liability for the listing broker. In Louisiana, the net listing is frowned upon. It's not illegal, but it's frowned upon because it is not a good business practice. The advance fee listing is a listing in which a broker gets an upfront fee to pay for his or her out-of-pocket expenses and then charges an hourly fee for his or her time. An advance cost listing, however, only covers those out-of-pocket costs or expenses incurred by the broker. With either one of these arrangements, the broker can still charge a commission based on the sales price. So with the advance fee, the broker gets this upfront stipend to pay for out-of-pocket costs and then charges an hourly rate. With the advance cost listing, the broker only gets an upfront stipend to pay for those out-of-pocket costs. But either one of those arrangements, the broker can still charge a commission upon finding a ready, willing, and able buyer. We can flip the script a bit in that there's also what's called an exclusive agency to purchase. This is an agreement where the broker works for the buyer. So this would be a buyer's broker. Here, the primary responsibility of the broker is to the purchaser to find that purchaser a property and negotiate a price and to negotiate a purchase. So now the principal is the buyer. This is also called buyer agency. This is very common out west, but not here in Louisiana. One thing that needs to be brought up here is that there is or there shall be no dual or divided agency. In other words, an agent or a broker cannot represent both sides to the transaction, cannot represent both the buyer and the seller, because that would be a conflict of interest. That will only occur with the consent and knowledge of the buyer and the seller. In other words, both the buyer and the seller would have to agree to both use the same agent. And that is likely to occur. Here's an example of the exclusive agency to purchase contract. So this is when a broker represents a buyer. Continues here. So in some states, it's very common for the seller to have a broker and the buyer to have a broker. So they each have their own representative, their own. The MLS system you may have heard of. it stands for Multiple Listing Service. This is a service among only realtor members to offer compensation to other member brokers and increase the market exposure for a listed property. So this is when listings are shared through a computer service. In this case, only one commission is paid by the seller of the property, but it's shared. It's shared amongst the listing broker, and that's who the agreement belongs to, the selling broker, if there's both a listing broker and a seller broker, and they're not the same person, and also the service also has to be compensated. So let's talk about broker compensation. The broker, that's the seller's broker, earns a commission at whatever point in the transaction the broker and owner agree upon. That usually occurs when a ready, willing, and able buyer is produced. That would be a buyer who's ready to buy at the seller's price and terms and has the financial capability to do so. So, in other words, as we mentioned earlier, that if the seller backs out of the deal, the seller decides to withdraw their property from sale after a deal has been struck, the broker still earns that compensation because they've produced that ready, willing, and able buyer. If, on the other hand, the buyer breaches, the broker doesn't earn his compensation. Of course, there are going to be some exceptions. If included in the purchase agreement and not in the purchase agreement, but in the listing agreement, if there is a clause that is a no clausing, no commission clause, that means just what it sounds like. That if it's included in the listing agreement, that means that the broker will not earn his or her commission unless the transaction is closed. Another way, or another clause that's an exception to the ready, willing, and able buyer is the reservation of right to sell clause. In this case, in the listing agreement, the seller can provide a list of parties, and if the property sells to one of those parties listed in the agreement, no commission is owed to the broker. Now, when it comes to the buyer's broker, that's a little bit more complicated. If we also have a buyer's broker in the transaction representing the buyer's interest, they too are entitled to a commission, but they're usually paid via the seller's broker. We'll often hear this term, procuring cause, to determine whether or not a commission has been earned. Procuring cause means the one whose efforts originated the procurement of the sale. How does a listing contract, which is the employment contract between the principal and the agent, how is that terminated? Well, the contract usually ends when the objective is completed. It can be completed or it can be terminated by mutual agreement, by abandonment, and that might occur if the broker acts counter to the principal's best interests. It could also be terminated by death, insanity, bankruptcy, of the principal or broker, if the listing agreement expires, if it's revoked by the principal. Oh, that's misspelled. That should be P-A-L at the end. I'm going to have to check that out. And destruction of the property. There are bargain brokers out there. For instance, the flat fee broker will list a property, suggest a market price, write advertising, assist with negotiations, draw up sales contracts, not from scratch. Remember, just filling in the blanks. Turn the signed papers over to an escrow company for closing for a fee that typically ranges from $400 to about $1,500. So regardless of the selling price of the property, the fee remains the same, flat fees. A discount broker is a full-service broker who charges less than the prevailing commission rates in his or her community. And there's the variable rate commissions that retains the lower commission for the bargain broker but allows the commission to increase to the other broker in order to give other brokers an incentive to help market their properties. Here's our list of key terms at the end of the chapter. Any questions? Don't hesitate to contact me.